Hi, this is Hippie with the Lost Samba podcast, bringing you the best of Brazilian music online in the English language. In this episode, we're going to speak about the androgynous, absolutely unique and groundbreaking internationally, Ney Matogrosso. The only ordinary thing about Ney Matogrosso is that he has 4 limbs, has a face, eyes, breathes like everybody else. But apart from that, he's a unique individual who lives in a league of his own and an extraordinarily talented person. Let's start with the place from where he comes from, which is the state of Goiás. This is like deep Brazil, deep countryside, which is bigger than the United Kingdom, the Netherlands and Portugal put together. He comes from the town of Bela Vista, that's on the frontier of Paraguay. Nowadays, if you live in Rio or São Paulo, you meet very few people from there. That's a place where no one comes from. When he was young, it was even truer. Nowadays, that region is cattle ground. It's where the deforestation is happening at its worst. But at the time, it was still very much like a frontier land with a lot of forest, indigenous people living around, and the place was as wild as Ney Matogrosso grew up to be. The region is not known for producing big artists, big thinkers. The mentality of the people living there was the mentality of frontier people, like the people who went to the Wild West, the people nowadays who are populating the rest of Brazil. Bossa Nova just passed almost unnoticed there. The Tropicalia also passed completely unnoticed. The only war that Brazil ever had was against Paraguay, as this is in the frontier with Paraguay. Most people there have a military past, and the animosity between Brazilians and Paraguayans is still there. Like, Paraguayans hate Brazilians. Most Brazilians don't care about it, but the people there in that region, they still feel this animosity between Paraguay and Brazil. His dad was a military, a very strict military, and Ney was a very sensitive and artistic child. He loved to draw. He was fascinated by theater. He wanted to be an actor. He liked singing too. And he was into all sorts of artistic endeavors that for a military father was very difficult to digest. And obviously this created a conflict. To make matters worse for Ney, he was the only one to stand up to him. His mother and his other 4 siblings were terrified of him, but Ney was the only one who said, hey, wait a minute. He didn't take it. Being a spiritualist, right? His father was into Allan Kardec and all that kind of stuff. The father was led to believe that Ney was an enemy that he had inherited from a different life, and he saw his son literally as an enemy to be tamed. So This was a very bad mixture. In his childhood, Ney Matogrosso, because of his dad's job, moved to several capitals of Brazil: Recife, Salvador, São Paulo, Rio, and then finally Brasilia. So his childhood wasn't that stuck to the wild nature around him. His grandparents were from there, and with his grandparents he would listen to all these amazing stories of when the place was even wilder. He'd always go back there, but he also was exposed to the culture, or to the city lights, if you will, in other states, and that obviously influenced him and probably also helped him develop this artistic persona, which bothered his dad so much. Ney Matogrosso spent his adolescence in Brasilia, which at the time was a very boring town. It didn't have anything. It was under construction. It was brand new. The way the architecture is, you are very isolated from other people, from your friends and everything. So he managed to keep his own world, so to speak. By 17, he was already fed up with the conflict with his dad and with pressure for him to become a proper macho, a military macho and everything. So he decided to leave home without his dad's permission and joined the Air Force in Rio de Janeiro. Now, one would expect, okay, joining the Air Force, that would make him a proper man, which it kind of did, because he was like away from the parental protection and his mom and family and everything. So it toughened him up. But on the other hand, it opened the doors for his sexuality. He saw in the Air Force that it was okay for one boy to fancy another one. He saw that he wasn't the only one. And it was there that his sexuality blossomed. As you can imagine, the military life, the hierarchical military life, very disciplined, wasn't fit for an artistic spirit as Ney Matogrosso. So he didn't stay long in the military. As soon as he could, he left. And he went to Brasilia, where he took up a pretty gruesome job of being a pathologist, something that involved like terminally ill children. It was like a pretty heavy job, and probably it had some influence over his need to be free and to express himself and to live life at full. Well, he had his job. He pursued his artistic endeavors, or his artistic goals, and he always was good in drawing. He continued drawing and painting, and he joined a theater group because his dream was to become an actor, and he also joined a choir. Now, in this choir, he was first put as a tenor, but the maestro saw that he had a very unusual voice, because he managed to reach notes that no other tenor in the world would manage to reach. And it was discovered that Ney Matogrosso had, and still has, a very, very, very rare voice worldwide, where he sings these very, very high notes, feminine notes, without having to do a falsetto. You know, doing a falsetto is what I'm going to do now. You know, it's not my natural voice, but he, with his natural voice, manages to reach very high notes. In the days of opera in Italy, where women weren't allowed to sing, they would castrate little boys to have the same voice that Ney Matogrosso had naturally. So it was a big asset, which he would later on explore, obviously. In the mid-60s, this is pretty early, Ney embraced the hippie life. He just left everything behind and decided to live out of crafts he did with leather. He traveled around the country like a gypsy. Now, this was no small feat at that time in the mid-60s, where there was violent and deadly dictatorship throughout the country. If you didn't have proof that you had a job, you could be put into jail for vagrancy. Also, guys with long hair and alternative guys were seen as subversive, so the police was hungry to put people like that in jail. Although the freedom was something, because no one had ever seen people like that, so you could really live an alternative life. People just saw you as a freak, but behind that, the was like a wild frontier, as his grandparents had in Goiás. It was a place to be explored, this hippie world. So there was a lot of mysticism, a lot of alternative kind of life. And in one of his adventures, or in one moment, he went to a card reader who said that he would be famous, but he would be something like Carmen Miranda, which at the time he said, this is just nonsense. But really, later on, when he became famous throughout the world, people would say, this is a new version of Carmen Miranda.
Tem torso de seda, tem corrente de ouro, tem bata rendada, tem saia engomada, tem sandália enfeitada, tem e tem graça como ninguém. Como ela requebra bem. Quando você se requebrar, caia por cima de mim, caia por cima de mim, caia por cima de mim.
So the card reader was right. He ended up living in Rio as a hippie, together with a very artistic crowd. And the place for these people in Rio is still a very bohemian and very like alternative place in Rio called Santa Teresa. He went to live in Santa Teresa at the house of someone who would be important in his life. She was a guitar teacher, but she also wrote music, and she would also become less famous, but she is a name that's quite well known for people into music, called Luli. And she was a member of a duo called Luli Lucinha. She gave guitar classes, and he did his leather stuff. And when students didn't come, she'd play guitar for him to sing, and she was really impressed by his different voice. And she pushed him to become professional, and he said, well, there's no place for someone with a voice like me, blah, blah, blah. He actually tried, but with no success. And then she heard of a band that was looking for a guy with a female voice. And the name of this band was Secos e Molhados. Although Ney Matogrosso sensed that this was going to be big in his life, and this was it. He was already in his 30s. He didn't see this as a chance to become a rock star or anything. He still saw his work as like an extension of his theater dream, a dream to become an actor, differently to most artists in the industry, not only in Brazil. He had a holistic approach to his work, right? So for him, this wasn't just about singing. It was about the makeup. It was about the dancing. It was about the whole experience of watching him perform. Though his costumes were like very, very, very sexual and very shocking, he considered that as a translation of nature, of the background he grew up in, closeness to a nature. Normally, right, the format of Brazilian artists, of Brazilian popular artists, bit after Dorival Caymmi, who started all of this, is that the artist would present himself sitting down or standing up, but with a guitar. He'd also play. He would probably write songs, or very close friends would write songs for him, but none of them saw themselves as like a showman. So as I said, Secos e Molhados already existed as a band, created by João Ricardo and Nelson Conrad. I'm cheating reading the thing there. They wrote like very good popish songs. It had nothing to do with bossa nova, it was pop. It was so good that a guy like Ney Matogrosso became interested in singing for them. They got on very well, they rehearsed as you do with a band, and in their first presentation with Ney Matogrosso, they were lucky enough that Ney Matogrosso at the time was in a theatre group with 60 people. He did like this experimental play with a huge crew, and he called everybody to watch his band, and that filled the theatre, because theatre people are usually very well connected. So it filled the theatre, and it was an instant success. It was an instant sensation, and word spread, and in that first round of shows, they were all full, and the press took notice, and it became really, really, really big.
O gato preto cruzou a estrada, passou por debaixo da escada,
e lá no fundo azul, na noite da floresta, a lua iluminou a dança, roda, festa, vira, 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 homem, vira, 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 lobisomem, vira, 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 homem, vira, vira.
bailão, corujas e pirilampus, entre os sacis e as fadas,
E lá no fundo azul, na noite da floresta, a lua iluminou a dança, roda, festa, vira, 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 homem, vira, 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 lobisomem, vira, 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 homem, vira, vira.
It was like a kind of a pop fairy tale, and that went national. Not only because of the songs, but mainly because of the figure of Ney Matogrosso. He presented himself with that feminine voice. He dressed in the most outrageous way, semi-naked, and did all this, homoerotic dances, and that was like very, very different. No one had ever seen this. This was like in '73. This was no one did that. Brazil was a homophobic country. This was a shocker. Everybody spoke about the Secos e Molhados, and they earned a fortune. In this, he says he had an influence of the Tropicalia, because he saw the Tropicalia open the doors for someone like him, especially Caetano Veloso, who, in '66 or '68, he presented himself all in pink, which is something that like machos would never do, and breaking with these stereotypes, breaking with the way people had to be, was part and parcel of what the Secos e Molhados and the Tropicalia wanted to do. Since the beginning of the Secos e Molhados days, Ney, he knew how to separate his private persona from the stage persona, which many people never got, but his private persona is very, very private, very different to the persona he created on stage, which is, for him, was a therapy where he could externalize his demons and everything. Despite this huge, unprecedented and unexpected success, the band didn't last long. They recorded one record that's like their main record, and a second one, because of contractual reasons. But what happened is a bit like what happened with David Lee Roth and Van Halen. He was bringing the crowds in. They were selling so much because of his presentation and his androgynous look and everything. But who wrote the songs were the other two. For whoever has any knowledge of the music industry, they were the big money makers, not Ney Matogrosso. And this obviously caused a conflict, and they kind of tried to trick him. He wasn't happy with that, so he decided to leave the band. He is there until the current days. The other two, they kind of are known for being members of the Secos and Molhados, but their solo careers weren't that successful. Ney Matogrosso's solo career was as successful as the Secos and Molhados, and it's marked by diversity, right? He delved in all sorts of genres in the Brazilian music universe, from sambas to guaranias. That's things from the frontier with Paraguay region to rock to anything you can imagine. He did it all with a very personal touch.
Me dizer do meu compromisso com isso ou aquilo. Se o que a gente quer não deixa de ser belo motivo pra se festejar de modo indiscreto o que vai nascer. E todas as histórias que o mundo imagina pra sobreviver. Prefiro não saber. Prefiro não saber.
What happened, as with many hippies, when it came down to business, he was very serious. He was very down to earth. Also, he's known to be very strict and very professional. He took also singing lessons, so he became like a proper singer, and he gained respect from all quarters as a great singer, which he is. There's no doubt about that. What also transpired in his career was not only singing, he was also became a lighter. He was always responsible, even in the times of the Secos and Molhados, for the lighting of his shows. But he lit shows of other artists, of RPM, that was a rock band of the 80s, pretty successful. He almost produced them, and he was responsible for the lighting and for the look of his one of his main boyfriends, Cazuza, like a rock idol of the 80s. He also more or less produced his shows and was responsible for the lighting. And of Chico Buarque, who's like one of the main icons of Brazilian music, the darling of the Brazilian intellectuals. He also lit his show. He also sang several songs of Chico Buarque. And as I said, he just became a very respected and respectable artist, despite his looks and despite everything, which attests to the Brazilian acceptance of difference, despite a sector of the society not being that accepting. The equivalent of Ney Matogrosso outside Brazil would be David Bowie. They happened more or less at the same time. It was the fashion of the day. He wasn't like so freakish after all. He fit in a certain way. There was a lot of things similar going on with glam rock. The strange thing is that the band Kiss took his look. His makeup thing was all from the theater stuff that he used to do. So this is one case of like a clear copy. The other guy who is very, very similar to, or is in the same league as Ney Matogrosso, is Prince, who's a very versatile artist. He also dances. The differences between the two is that Prince is a multi-instrumentalist. He writes his own songs also. So Prince plays guitar, he plays the keyboards. If you let him, he'll play the drums, he'll play whatever appears in front of him. Ney Matogrosso is much more of a theater guy. He's a singer, a very versatile one. And I'd say that he compensates his lack of knowledge in music with his theatrical knowledge, his holistic idea of scenography, um, and of performance. And also, he sings in a much bigger variety of styles than Prince. The song I'm going to play today is, for me, one of the best songs ever written in the Portuguese language. It's called Latin Blood, but it doesn't talk about Latinity as normally Latinos would say. I'm a macho, whatever comes, I'll take, blah, blah, blah. No, it's not that. It's more the actual resilience of the Latin people. He says the broken promises, the lies I had to say to survive. I broke with everything, but here I am. My Latin blood is here. Sangue Latino for you. Jurei mentiras e sigo sozinho. Assumo os pecados. Os ventos do norte não movem moinho. O que me resta é só um gemido. Meus mortos, meus caminhos tortos, meu sangue latino, minha alma cativa, rompe tratados, traz ritos. Lancei no espaço um tom de desabafo, e o que me importa é não estar vencido. Minha vida, meus mortos, meus caminhos tortos, latino, minha alma cativa, rompe tratados, trai os ritos, minha lança lancei no espaço. Personally, I don't have any quirk with Ney Matogrosso. I've seen a few gigs of his. One is kind of memorable. That I saw in the Maracanãzinho, which is like the biggest. It used to be. I think now it's closed, or people don't use it. After the Rock in Rio, people stopped using it because the acoustics there were horrible, horrible, horrible. You had like international bands at the time, Genesis, Alice Cooper, Rick Wakeman. I'm a no guy, so these are the guys I'd watch. I also watch Van Halen there, and other jazz guys, John McLaughlin. I saw a gig of his there, and it was a significantly big stadium, and it was packed. And I was like a post-teenager or late teenager. I was 17, 18, and I was like completely shocked about how gay the whole presentation was. He was all kind of sweaty, full of grease, and there was some other three guys also like strong dudes, full of grease and with this homoerotic kind of clothes on them, and they were all kind of grabbing him and doing sexual innuendos while he sang. It was really, 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 for me at the time, shocking. But I paid to see him, and the whole stadium paid to see him and probably to be shocked. So this was before he became like more serious, and he gradually grew out of this. I'll just add two quick little songs here to finalize the podcast. The first one is like really making fun of the macho guys. It's a song done in the interior of the Northeast, where the guys are supposed to be like proper machos and withstand the hot weather and be cowboys and everything. And it's a song called Homem com H, would be the equivalent in English as man with a capital M. And he obviously takes a complete piss of this notion.
Quando eu estava pra nascer, de vez em quando eu via a mãe dizer: ai meu Deus, como eu queria que esse cabra fosse homem, cabra macho pra danar. Ah, mamãe, aqui estou eu, sou homem com H e como sou. Nunca vi rastro de cobra, nem couro de lobisomem. Se correr o bicho pega, se ficar o bicho come. Porque eu sou homem, porque eu sou homem. Menina, eu sou homem, menina, eu sou homem como sou.
And the other one is a surprising samba that he recorded with Moreira da Silva, who we have a podcast about. He was the king of the malandragem of like the streetwise guys at the time, and like a living legend. At the time he was a living legend, something like the equivalent of the Brazilian Buena Vista Social Club at the time, but you will know, with this kind of streetwise edge to him. And he recorded with Moreira da Silva a classic, a very funny classic. Anyway, I'll let the podcast finish with that, and I'll be back in 2 weeks' time, hopefully. Okay, all the best. Pide Morengueira and Ney Matogrosso for you guys. Até a próxima. Bye.
Na subida do morro me contaram que você bateu na minha nega. Isso não é direito, bater numa mulher que não é sua. Deixou a nega quase crua no meio da rua. A nega quase que virou presunto. Eu não gostei daquele assunto. Hoje venho resolvido a lhe mandar para a cidade de pé junto. Vou lhe tornar em um defunto.
Você mesmo sabe que eu já fui um malandro malvado. Somente estou regenerado, cheio de malícia. Dei trabalho à polícia pra cachorro. Dei até no dono do morro. Mas nunca abusei de uma mulher que fosse de um amigo. Agora me zanguei consigo. Hoje venho animado a lhe deixar todo cortado. Vou dar-lhe o castigo. Meto-lhe o aço no abdômen e tiro fora o seu umbigo. 4 dedos de solinge na barriga do Bargulino. Quando ele ia caindo, ele disse: Morengueira, você me feriu. Eu então disse-lhe: é claro, você me desrespeitou, mexeu com a minha nega. Você sabe que em casa de vagabundo, né, Ney? Malandro não pede emprego. Aí meti a mão na dona, isso aqui da peixeira.